So the next step in the process is typically the excitations or boundaries, end boundaries, I should say. I typically do them at the same time. I'm going to go up to Maxwell 3D as the menu item up here, and I'm going to choose solution type first. And it's very important to recognize that with our different design types, almost every design type has multiple options for solution type. So this is basically pointing to the type of solver, computational solver that is being used. For Maxwell 3D, the default is magnetostatics. We want to start with electrostatics. So I'm just going to toggle that on, and I'm going to say OK. And with that, I should have valid options to select for the excitations now. So to set up an excitation, there's multiple ways to do this. I'm going to operate from our modeler window here, and I'm going to select the object. Notice it highlights. It's also telling me at the bottom left that one object is selected. So with that selected, I can now right-click on the object, and I can choose Assign Excitation. And since we have an electrostatics solution type defined now, I get to apply a charge to it. So if you remember from our earlier discussion, we set our charge to be 1 coulomb, which is actually a very high value, but that works fine for us. So I'm just going to choose 1. You can see the units of coulomb is there. I'm just going to go ahead and leave the default name charge 1. You're free to change that at any time, and I'm going to OK it. Now, you'll notice on the left-hand side, excitations now has a plus sign, which means if I hit that plus sign, I can expand it and see what's underneath. And sure enough, the object that we just called charge 1 shows up as an option here. If I click it, it'll highlight what charge 1 has been assigned to, and it'll also bring up the properties panel. And if I change my mind on anything, if I want to rename it here, I can just type values in there. I could also change the value, make it anything I want in here as well. So that's going to be very common for us to go back and choose objects and then change in the property setup, or maybe even right-clicking on the node itself and making some changes that way as well. So again, lots of different ways to do the same thing. So now I want to set the boundaries, and to do that, I first am going to tell Maxwell 3D where my solution domain is going to be. I'm going to use, again, I'm still in the Draw tab here. I'm going to use this button called Create Region, and when I click that button, I have a choice to make. I'm going to choose Pad. Actually, I'm going to leave it on Pad all directions similarly, and let's use the instead of a percentage offset, I can change that to absolute offset, and you'll see what happens when I put 500 millimeters here, and I'm going to OK it. Now I can see some additional objects, or I should say one object here has been assigned to vacuum, and it's this special object called the region here. To get a better view real quick, I can either zoom out with my scroll button of the mouse like I'm doing here, or I can also just say Fit All. And you can see that if you look at the alignment of this edge here, I gave it 500 millimeter padding. If you think of that point sphere as being right in the center, 500 millimeters on both sides is going to give me an edge of 1 meter. And of course, we're looking at it in millimeters here, but that's exactly what we expect here. So this is the first part of setting up my solution domain here. So I've got my region, they're both air, and now I have an object that I can choose from. Now, instead of explicitly applying a boundary to this new region that we created, I'm actually going to apply another excitation. I'm going to use a 0-volt excitation around the perimeter of that region. So I'm essentially forcing a voltage of 0, which would be analogous to saying in our model of a point charge, the only thing in the universe is the point charge. That 0 voltage condition doesn't really exist until we go out to infinity. But it's, as you'll see, it's not practical for us to model, it's impossible to model infinity in the solution, and it's usually not even practical to model very excessive sizes unless we have structure of interest in there. So for our example, I'm essentially truncating the size of the universe down to about a half a meter on either side. And you'll see the effect of that. But this essentially does what we want it to do. before I choose the object to apply that excitation, I want to change my selection mode. And if I right click in the space, I can go to selection mode and choose faces. You could also have hit the letter F. And when I do that, now if I hold control down and grab the individual faces, I can rotate it with my center scroll button. Now I've selected all the faces, and what I'm doing is ensuring that the voltage, the zero voltage condition is only going to be applied to the faces of the object and not the center. Make sure that you only see 6 faces like I'm showing here. If you did a box select with everything, you might even pick up the face of the sphere in there as well, and you don't want to put a 0 voltage on that. With this selected now, I can right click, and again, instead of saying boundaries, I'm going to go to excitations. Instead of choosing charge, I'm going to choose voltage, and the default works out just fine. Voltage 1 with a 0 millivolt. The units don't matter here. I'm going to say OK. And there we go. I can look at my excitation node and I can see my charge. Of course, it's way in the center. If I wanted to sip that out, I can always right click and say zoom to. So it's verifying I have this charge applied to this object. If I go to voltage, I can do the same thing. I can say zoom to, and it backs out the view, and I can see 0 millivolts has been applied to the outer region of the solution space.